look, if you've been a highly successful CEO, COO, innovator, or inventor, and you love hierarchical, rigid, siloed, old school type operations, we can't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Like the immediate conflict in culture, in thinking, if you're analogical, right? If everything you do is by analysis and analogy and benchmarking, you don't really use logic, you don't get to root cause and effect, we don't think that's a recipe for good innovation and breakthrough.
Welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders really driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Corrado De Gasperis, the visionary CEO of Comstock, a publicly listed company committed and leveraging decarbonization technologies for the reduction of carbon emissions across a really interesting and multiple set of kind of industries as broad as mining, fuel, and energy. And Corrado, you're a very busy man. I appreciate your time coming on today and joining me on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, tell me, I suppose taking it back a bit or giving some thought, right? You've had a 30-year plus career. I suppose as you sit here today as the kind of CEO and exec chair of Comstock, what do you think has really helped kind of shape you professionally as you reflect on your career?
It's funny, I guess two things, right? The thing that shaped me the most, probably my parents. My parents were immigrants. They came to the United States with no language, no money, and just watching how hard, they worked to make a life, and maybe as much as the hard work, just the absolute dedication, the absolute subordination, and watching that succeed. I think certainly forged my work ethic. Initially, without doubt, it's pervaded my life. So I'm blessed for that. But I think also earlier in my career, in my young 30s, we took on an assignment to turn around a fatally wounded company, a remarkably material science-based, technology-based company that was going under. And I mean, it was insolvent by every measure. And when I went into that assignment with the mindset of just, we're going to work as hard as anyone to fix this company, and then realize that hard work or individual effort wasn't going to cut it, and I was exposed to a new way of thinking, let's say a systemic sort of notion of management, but it was motivated, driven by the fact that, and it was daunting, like the realization that no matter how hard I work, I can't do this myself. It's going to have to be the system. It's going to have to be the entire team. And that was, I remember sitting there saying, oh no. But then I came across, I guess, someone that I would call my teacher that exposed me to this new way of thinking and sort of a hard, dedicated work ethic, which is important, right? Working hard is important. Being dedicated, I think, is even more important. But working smart sort of changed my life, So those are the two. It was other people, my parents in one case, my teacher in another, that really transformed my ability to do what we're doing today.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. And look, I suppose as a CEO, I was just looking through. I mean, you've done a CEO gig. It looks like for many years, right? So, just roughly, how many years' experience as a CEO? And am I right in thinking it's about 3 or 4 different companies you've been CEO of?
Yeah, I was let's say I spent a decade at KPMG, and I made partner there, and I was servicing companies like Union Carbide and General Electric. Helping them solve their problems. That was fun. I was in my 20s. Then in my 30s, I was the CFO, but led the transformation of this global industrial graphite business. And then since then, so it would be, 25 years, 20 certainly solid as the chief executive.
Yeah, no, got it. And tell me, like, thinking back now to Comstock 14 years ago, because reading through and looking what you guys are doing, and we'll discuss that loads on the podcast. But I take it 14 years ago, Comstock was a different type of company, right? In terms of what you guys did and what the focus was. So maybe let's just start there first of all, and then we can talk through transformation, as it were.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll just segue it to say, transformed a global industrial graphite company, transformed a multinational regional steel processing company, and then came to Comstock to once again fix a broken mining company, mining district, entire mining district. And I don't think, Simon, I ever intelligently planned to be a fix a broken company guy or a turnaround guy. I think the willingness to take on a huge challenge that first time sort of pegged me into, someone that could fix an industrial company. And so it was remarkable. We consolidated a 12 square mile nationally recognized historic world-class mining district, world-class gold and silver deposits, built out all the infrastructure, built out the resource, built the mine plan, permitted it, entitled it, put it fully into production, and then got national and state and local recognition for environmental stewardship, repairing water systems, repairing infrastructure like highways, and then going above and beyond and repairing old historic mills from the late 1800s, old head frames, and a real part of the national legacy of this landmark. And that's when I sort of paused and I said, and we got a lot of recognition for it. We were honored with some really incredible environmental recognition. And I said, rather than fixing other people's mistakes or broken companies, why don't we take this platform and start the companies and do it the right way from the beginning? that was sort of the epiphany in 2019, to say we can do it. And we had done already a tremendous amount, like the old timers used mercury. We did a tremendous amount of mercury remediation. We worked directly with the EPA at the national level, the EPA at the state level. Just did some remarkable things. So we have a platform here to do good. And what would be the most impactfully good thing to do? Like what's worth taking on? And in one way, it was, what are other people not doing, or other people not doing well enough that we should try to make an impact at that level, of that magnitude? And that's really where I would call it the last transformation occurred. Instead of transforming an existing physical industrial operation, let's create a new entity that thinks about the technologies required to impact humanity, to impact the climate, to truly create sustainable ecosystems, if you will.
And I mean, that's some journey, because I mean, just a couple of things come to mind. We're talking about, I'm right in thinking, an industry that's pretty set in the way it does things as well, right? So pretty slow to adopt innovation and change, right? And then I'm thinking, how did you get all the other people around the company and your investors? And I mean, it just, it must have been some journey. That maybe just talk us through that.
Yeah, I'll tell you that that was one of the things that were a little consternating for me. If you go into an 800-person steel processing company, or you go into a industrial mining company, they're established in their mindset. I mean, they're in fact, one of the first conversations was, we're miners. What do you know about mining? And I actually said, well, very little, thank goodness, because as I span the landscape, miners do a pretty good job destroying capital. Like we should figure out a different way to do this, a smarter way to do this. And ultimately, ultimately it depends on where an individual is on their journey. But I've been fortunate enough that most of the people had a curiosity, had an interest, right, for change, for improvement. Not always, but for most cases. And so we built some pretty remarkable teams, willing to take on more meaningful challenges, more impactful challenges.
Tell me about the decarbonisation piece, or this commitment now, right? You've spent your, life and career, certainly at this stage, committed to the journey and the story. I want to just delve a little bit more into the why. Like how just the journey on really knowing that I'm going down this road and this, the connection.
I'll tell you two of the seeds that were planted, then I'll hit right in the question. So first of all, GraphTech, my first industrial graphite company, took petroleum coke, the waste at the bottom of the barrel of the oil and gas refining industry, converted that carbon-based material into synthetic graphite, made electrodes and cathodes that were then used to recycle scrap metal in the electric arc furnace. Okay, so literally the graphite technology, the electrodes were the enabler of an entire recycling industry. So I had it in my head that doing good, recycling, renewing, and making money was never in conflict. So I never had a struggle with being good stewards of the environment and being profitable. It just never was really part of the lexicon. Secondly, to save that company, we had to transform the way we think systemically, right? So we actually launched a program called the Power of One. So instead of having 13 country companies, 13 P&Ls, 13 general managers, can we possibly have one system that has one precise goal, right? And can we define, let's call it the constraint of the system? A system can only move as fast as its slowest part, okay? So where is that part, and can we subordinate? And then miracles started to happen, right? Alignment started to happen. People weren't going like this, they were going like this, And so I realized the power of harnessing the system could make tremendous impact. I mean, tremendous impact. So the idea of enabling systemic decarbonization has like a dual meaning for us. What is the most impactful thing that we can do, right? So we're not, and we don't dismiss it. It's very important that every day, every person does their little bit to help the environment, because that adds up, okay? And that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So how do we get to sufficiency? How do we actually invert the curve? How do we turn, right, the net increase of greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere to stable and neutral, right? A natural balance. How do you do it? The only way to do it is across the entirety of transportation burn, the entirety of mobility. Okay, so if you're not working on a solution that's going to impact the entirety of that system, then what are you doing? You may be doing your little part, but we're not going to get there. So the idea of enabling systemic decarbonization means across entire systems of industries, right? Entire industries, if you will. But there's a double meaning. The second meaning is we must do it systemically, which means applying the scientific method, using logic, organizing ourselves for speed and scale. Otherwise, you might actually have a technology that works that'll never see the light of day. You might have a technology that works that might get there in 2083. Too late, game's over. So that's what we were inspired by, the ability to harness a system, right? And it's not a cliche. Right? How do you interdepend? Where is the system's performance defined? How do you govern and manage that? How do you staff the people to enable it, right? And so dry run with GraphTech, hugely successful. Dry run with Comstock mining, hugely successful. Now let's decide where we want to make the most impact. And decarbonizing Look, if humanity isn't going to make it, what are we here for, right? We've got to have more people taking on bigger, more impactful challenges for us to succeed as a race.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining. Tell us a little bit about the company, right? In terms of,
Absolutely,
some of the businesses within your portfolio, because I'm right in thinking it's like a holding company, and you've got 3 different businesses within Comstock that are doing different things. So all of them are interesting. So could you just talk us through what they are?
yeah. So foundationally, right, the mission is to enable systemic decarbonization. Every business must, the goal must achieve, right, a decarbonizing impact, right? But each one of the businesses has taken on the commercialization of new technology, a new solution to make a bigger impact. So we have Comstock Fuels taking waste woody biomass into very extremely low carbon fuels, liquid fuels, sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, clean gasolines. We have Comstock Metals taking waste electrification products, products that have critical minerals, critical materials that are, for most intents and purposes, substantially all going into landfills and just being thrown away, and renewing those for 100% reuse. And then Comstock Mining, which we had to scratch our head a bit. And we said, well, how do we decarbonize with mining? Of course, minerals are critical, but we can't negatively impact the landscape. So we invested in technologies. Frankly, we invested in physics-based artificial intelligence, and in the mining application, geophysics-based artificial intelligence that will allow us to accelerate mineral discovery in a much less impactful, meaning negatively impactful way to the environment. And we're creating mine plans now that we believe will redefine reclamation. We've gotten, in the first 4 years of mining, we got 3, either state or nationally recognized reclamation awards. And that's pretty exciting to be best in class when it comes to, reclamation and environment. But we're applying it against a relatively low standard, and so we want to redefine post-productive uses where you wouldn't even know there was a mine there. You could have communities, you can have the landscape will look different, but better. And so it takes a lot of advanced planning, a lot of engineering, and to some degree technology to do that. We invested in this physics-based artificial intelligence company called Quantum Generative Materials, GenMat for short. GenMat has a low Earth orbit satellite with one of the most powerful hyperspectral imagers, circling the globe right now. Their first mission is going to be to scan the Comstock district, build a digital twin of the geologic model, reconcile that to our model, and then use probabilistic algorithms to predict minerals. Now, if it works, Simon, we'll find more gold and silver on the Comstock, and that will be exciting. But the application, the method, right, of this artificial intelligence will redefine mineral discovery as we know it. That's the real objective.
I saw that the hyperspectral sensor it launched, didn't it? It was on a it was on a rocket. When was that? When did that happen?
It launched in November of 2023. We had anxiety, right? You're watching the rocket, you're afraid it's going to blow up. It doesn't. Then you're watching the payload get sort of deployed into orbit. You're worried that's not going to work. And then the most anxious, ironically, was making the ground link, right? Making the connection to the mission control station, and then once that occurred, we had a few months of software development, the actual enabler of being able to use the data for prediction. So it's not true that anybody could put a satellite into orbit. We feel pretty proud of what GenMat accomplished. There were a number of protection softwares and challenges and regulatory things that they got over. But getting the data is one thing. There are other satellites in orbit, there are other hyperspectral imagers in orbit getting data, but being able to decipher through all the noise, predict and have intelligent outcome from the data, that's the artificial intelligence. That's the real differentiator of the technology that GenMat's developing. So we're very proud to be on that pioneering landscape. But renewable fuels, renewable metals, new mineral discovery, and then GenMat by itself they simulate, synthesize, and engineer new material configurations and ultimately new materials at the atomic level, right? So to be able to, develop a quantum physics, a quantum chemistry, a quantum geophysics node in their brain, in their artificial intelligence that will simulate materials at the atomic level and simulate and predict electrical conductivity, thermal conductivity, heat densities. Think about the applications for batteries. Think about the application for semiconductors. Think about the application for fuels, right? We believe that physics-based AI is still pioneering, is still bleeding edge, but the reason we prioritized it 3 years ago was we think in 3 to 5 years from now, if you're in the material science business, if you're not using these tools and these technologies, you're a dinosaur. You're not at a disadvantage. You might be obsolete.
Amazing. And just a couple of things around that, unpacking a little bit of that. How long does it take? So you launched the the sensor, as you said,
November
last year. Yeah. So as it relates to the AI, you taking the data and then using AI to then see the results from it. At what point do you see the results from it?
So it's we think the Comstock actually represents the best base case for what you're asking, right? So the hyperspectral imager, we would get the data within days, okay? So we have to synchronize the timing of the satellite's orbit. You give the exact coordinates to scan the district, you get the data, you download the data. But then what we need to do, and what our geologic team has been doing with their geophysics team, is sort of correlating what we already know about the Comstock. Meaning we have 150 years worth of data that goes down, 3/4 of a mile, right? Then you corroborate that data with the new data. The hyperspectral imaging has, sees bands of lights and colors that, is, invisible to the human eye, and then start correlating that physical data, that geophysical data with our known data, and you can start to predict things. So the answer to the question is within days, you have the data. Within, weeks or possibly months, right, you're able to integrate that into a three-dimensional geostatistical model, right? And then you would go out, and we use the term ground truthing, right? Let's see what it predicts, and then let's drill a hole and see if it's right. and then you validate with known geology and new geology the efficacy, right? It works, and so it's perfect. We have a perfect platform for proving the technology out.
Yeah, no, amazing. A couple of things come to mind as well, right? First of all, you're out there investing, analyzing some pretty bleeding edge physics-based kind of AI algorithms. I'm just thinking about the people in your company that all of a sudden need to make sense of this and to see, like, that couldn't have been easy. Right.
No, well,
first of all, you talk like you're an expert on this as well.
Yeah, no. So certainly not. So I would say, look, let me run it down it for a second. In the lignocellulosic fuels, we have multi-decade industry experts, right? They've been living the carbon chain, and they've been breaking, the chain down into fuels, for their whole career. They're also on the bleeding edge of the highest yields, lowest carbon impact solution. And the technology officers and the engineers are brilliant. I mean, brilliant. Our chief engineer alone has built 23 biodiesel facilities in the last 17 years, engineered, built, commissioned. In metals, we have a PhD chemist running the business who spent 25 years building, I would say hazardous material and sensitive material handling plants all over the world. So that's Comstock Fuels, Comstock Metals, Comstock Mining, top highly educated, most experienced geologists and engineers. But when you talk about physics-based AI, Simon, you're entering a new realm, okay? That team, you might not be surprised, is much, much younger, right? But the intellectual horsepower is hard to exaggerate. You've got condensed matter physicists, you've got chemists, you've got machine learning, you've got engineers. These people take 2-hour breaks and study math, on their own time, and they're brilliant. They're brilliant. But the common denominator is when you're meeting, 25 and 26-year-old, brilliance. When you talk to them about using a logical, systemic approach to management or a science-based approach to solving problems, their response is, what other way would we do it? Contrasting to your example when you're talking to a 35-year-old mine engineer, or a steel metallurgist, right? They know exactly how to do it, and they don't need any help in doing it any other way. So what our common denominator is the way we think, the way we organize, the way we plan, and the way we execute. It bonds us together, right? Logic becomes the prevalent language. Authority comes from knowledge, right? So who do we subordinate to? Not to the CEO, to the most knowledgeable person that, for that subject matter. It's incredibly professional. It's incredibly respectful, but it's also, we face reality hard. Like, we surface the most difficult conflicts first. We challenge assumptions relentlessly. I mean, it can be exhausting, a day of work, because, you're using this more than you're using this, and that's sort of the transition from what my parents taught me, I guess.
Absolutely. And tell me, when you're investing in, like, as you mentioned, GenMat, are you, because no doubt these are relatively early stage technologies, right? And probably small companies, I'd figure. Are you, are you investing in one of their financing rounds, and or are you just a customer of them, or how does that work?
This might be remarkable. Okay, we basically, when I said, 5 years ago, why don't we do these from scratch the right way from the beginning? That's what we meant. So we seed invested GenMat. We seed invested Comstock Metals. We acquired IP, restructured, and then seed invested fuels. And I'll go further than that, right? We have an investment in a company called Green Li-ion, Lion spelled Li-ion, play on lithium ion, out of Singapore. I guess they were probably TRL1 when we were talking to them, and now they've commissioned their first system in Oklahoma, and they're expanding. That $2 million investment has gone 10x for us, and they're just getting started. And so it's seed level. It's seed level, and because the way that we think and the way that we plan is so thorough, so different, that the way that we do our diligence is the company willing to build a plan this way? Is the company willing to make decisions this way? Is the company willing to organize themselves systemically and measure themselves this way? And if the answer is yes, and if the people are good and the technology has the potential to make the impacts that we described earlier, then it clears our thesis. And we don't necessarily control the entities. Comstock Fuels, Comstock Mining, Comstock Metals, 100% owned subsidiaries. But GenMat, 32%, Green Lion, 14%. But we do have control over the methodology. We have control over the schedules, control in a governing sense, right? We're empowering them, we're enabling them, not just with capital, right, but with the thinking, the conceptual framework to strategically plan, to operationally execute in a different way.
No, I love it. Really impressive.
I'll say, I just want to say one other thing. I apologize. It is impressive to be able to enable these things. 2 months ago, we were like fourth and goal, using an American football analogy. We were fourth and goal on the goal line, right? We were just ready to punch it in commercializing these techs, right? Since then, Green Lion has deployed their first system, commercializing in Oklahoma. Comstock Metals has commercialized their first system, now operating in Nevada. And Comstock Fuels and GenMat are talking to industry scale companies that are super impressive and super impressed, right? So a year from now, I might agree with you, right? It's impressive, right? If we go 4 for 4 in seed round activities, I'll be feeling pretty good.
Yeah, no, I know you're at the beginning of the commercialization journey, right? I get that. Yeah, I was particularly thinking, you're thinking like venture firms, talking to seed companies. I'm curious, the pipeline of companies you would have spoken with at that point, and how much kind of diligence and research did you do to find companies that had the tech that you wanted in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, let me say that in the case of Green Lion and GenMat, Green Lion already crossing the finish line and GenMat about to, there are other venture capital funds highly interested and investing in those techs now. So they would be talking A's and B's. We were seed. And to the extent we're not the wholly owned sub or the majority, we applaud that. Like, we support that. We're systemic in thinking. The more the merrier, as long as. But to answer your question, we search for technologies that could make a global impact, right? So we're now, right now, for example, assessing water treatments that could result in not only renewable water, but the generation of clean hydrogen. Right? We're looking at things that we believe will make a global impact in the future. Then the diligence really comes around to just 2 things. What's the prospect of technology readiness? Okay? Is it 1, 2, or 3 on the scale to prove out the tech? And then what's the prospect of us getting it to TRL 6 and 7, right? Engineering so that it can go economically feasible and scale. We do that all right up front. And some people say, well, you can't know if something's economically feasible at TRL 1 or 2. It's true that you can't know for certain, but you could assess the possibilities. So when someone's presenting us a technology to harness the sun, we're like, yeah, we don't think that's going to quite be there anytime soon, right? It's just economically, or even artificial photosynthesis, something we think is exciting, but we're decades maybe away, right? AI might change that, but right now that's what we think. So if the technology readiness is reasonable, if the economic prospect is reasonable, and it makes a massive impact, that's the first gate. The second gate is completely different. Is the management team, are the subject matter experts willing to work systemically, to subordinate to the system, right? And look, if you've been a highly successful CEO, COO, innovator, or inventor, and you love hierarchical, rigid, siloed, old school type operations, we can't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Like, the immediate conflict in culture, in thinking, if you're analogical, right? If everything you do is by analysis and analogy and benchmarking, you don't really use logic, you don't get to root cause and effect, we don't think that's a recipe for good innovation and breakthrough. The initial tech, right, is only the starting point. You must have a rigorous thinking process to challenge assumption, surface conflict, challenge assumption, surface conflict, challenge assumption. Rigorous, rigorous, rigorous. We believe then the diligence is all about what's the probability of a good team of good thinkers getting this to the finish line. And if that passes the test, then we see. Now, that can take typically what our due diligence looks like. It's very, very little on the actual existing fact pattern. We should do that quickly. Okay, if we can't get our arms around that quickly, it's probably too complicated for us. But then we'll spend months from the ground up building the plan with the team. And if they're willing to invest that time, then we have a fully aligned plan, a clear goal. Like we know we have agreement on the problem, we have agreement on the direction of the solution, we have agreement on sufficiency of the solution. Now you have a strategic plan. The alignment is 99.9%, right? Then it's low risk proposition for us. So we get to take on these ridiculously high risk new technology propositions at what we feel is a very, very low residual risk.
Amazing. No, thank you for explaining. Really good to dive into detail on that point. Tell me, what do you think about the future? I mean, it sounds like you're at the beginning of things, right, after 14 years. But tell me, what are your kind of hopes and dreams, for the company?
So first, let me say, in view of the future, we're optimists. Okay, I think the world and certainly America is on the brink of an incredible innovation explosion. I think material science-based, physics-based, artificial intelligence is going to spawn it. But you're looking at things like thorough neural computing, right? You're going to see breakthroughs in data compute and horsepower, quantum computing. So you have classical computing, you have quantum computing, you have thorough neural computing, right? You're going to see revolutions of technology. So we're very optimistic. Having said that, right, we think it's important to acknowledge that humanity could fail. that if we're not doing our best and reaching the furthest to make an impact that's positive for all of humanity, then we could fail. We believe that if you don't think that way, it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's very important, right? Look at, people have various views of Elon Musk, right? But he's convinced there's existential threats to humanity and that if we don't colonize other planets, like we're not going to make it. I'm inspired by that kind of thinking, and then to be able to launch and land rockets the way he does, right? It's inspiring. So we see a future where clean energy, right? We need energy. So energy. When you look at our individual business goals around enabling systemic decarbonization as the mission is to accelerate hard technologies for the energy transition. We must get to a level of civilization, I guess it's the Kardashev scale, where we type 1 civilization, where all of our energy needs are met cleanly. Right, so naturally we have a natural balance of clean energy. I believe it'll come from a number of sources. I think electrification is obviously part of the solution. Low carbon liquid fuels, we believe, is a critical part of the transition solution. We think hydrogen is going to be a huge part of the ultimate solution. Nuclear is a part of the solution, and we could fantasize a bit about beyond that with fusion and things. But so I think that once we satisfy energy, then we get food and water, and then we have stability in our civilization, right? Our basic needs are not at threat, right? It should diffuse a lot of conflict on the planet, and then we can talk about, evolving from there. And the other thing is we would it's not just what we're doing, it's how we're doing it. We believe that, working in siloed, local optima, poorly measured enterprises is wasteful to our natural resources, wasteful to our human capital, wasteful to our financial capital. If we can work systemically, interdependently, aligned on common goals. And what we're starting to see now, Simon, is that Comstock as an enterprise working systemically within its legal boundaries is starting to work systemically with national labs, working systemically with European partners, working systemically with early adopting customers, working systemically with physics-based AI companies. If we own or don't own them is not the relevance. It's how we interdepend, right? So to us, the future is systemic decarbonization, meaning we solve for energy across industries, and we do it systemically, which maybe demonstrates a more intelligent way to work, a more intelligent way to leverage our human capital, natural resources for the good of humanity. So that's what drives us. That's what really inspires us.
How do the markets react? How have they evolved in their reaction towards this story over the last few years?
We're in a pretty interesting transition. Okay, so firstly, the markets had to get acclimated to a company being a junior miner, right now being sort of an emerging leader in energy transition technologies. Okay, that's not an easy leap, I guess, right? I think for most intents and purposes, we finally got an existing group of investors and some new investors to understand what we're trying to do. Now they see 4 activities, right? Comstock Fuels, Comstock Metals, Comstock Mining, and GenMat sort of on the goal line, right? And some say, well, is it too good to be true? It would be nice to see some of these commercializing, and so there's just a little bit of incredulous, right? I hate to use the word credibility, but maybe it's credibility, right? That are these things really is going to make it? I smirk when they say that because I know the substance of what's happening at GenMat, what's happening in fuels, the customers we're talking to, and how floored, frankly, they are at what the technologies can do. It's still hard. Right? It's still hard to adopt new technologies. They don't call it the Valley of Death for nothing. It's where a lot of companies go to die, or let's say a lot of technologies go to die. But that's exactly why we took it on, right? Because we understand what's necessary, but we also understand sufficiency. So most of these companies that go to die in the Valley of Death meet a lot of the necessary conditions. Let's just argue, for example, there's 13 prerequisites to get commercial. They have 5, they have 8, even worse, they have 10. If you just miss 1 or 2, you won't make it. Usually when we meet these companies, they think, oh no, we have everything we need, we just need your money. And I said, if you had everything you needed, you wouldn't need my money. If you had 12 of the 13, you'd have 13 as well. Capital is not the constraint. Let me say this very carefully. There's an abundance of waste wood in the world, enough to solve the carbon crisis for transportation. Like a lot of the other technologies we see, the feedstocks that they use aren't sufficient. They won't make it no matter what. There's an abundance of capital in the world. Capital is not naturally the constraint of the system, but if you have a poor plan, if you're unable to effectively communicate your plan, if your plan has some holes in it that you don't want to deal with, you want to ignore and make believe that they don't exist, then you won't be able to get the capital and you'll say, I'm constrained by capital. And you will be constrained by capital, but it's self-imposed, it's artificial. The capital markets are fascinating. We can always demonstrate sufficiency. And by the way, if we don't have sufficiency, we don't try to demonstrate it. We're not going to go to the markets and tell them we have something when we don't really have it yet. Maybe we have it at TRL 6. Maybe it's at TRL 7. We'll be honest with them. And some people are willing to bet on TRL 5, 6, 7. Some people are not. And that's, you want that to be the right alignment. So right now, I think we're an incredible buy because our value is depressed by people waiting to see, some of these get over the finish line. But what's interesting is we're attracting not so much public equity participants, but private equity participants saying, hey, can we invest directly into Comstock metals? Can we invest directly into Comstock fuels? And we say, of course, as long as it accelerates the speed at which we affect the goal, we're open to it.
Amazing. No, I think that's a great place to end it, really, because hugely uplifting and motivating. So thanks so much for coming on and talking through, your kind of story and, your vision for Comstock. And yeah, I'll be rooting for you guys. And thanks so much. Really appreciate the chat.
My pleasure. Look forward to speaking again, Simon. Thank you.